So let's palpate now the rest of the muscles of the arm and the forearm. So a lot of these are pretty straightforward. For most of this, we'll be using our hands to palpate and experience the tissues, but we'll do a little bit of release for this first part. So let's begin by looking at the lats and the pecs together. So remember, the latissimus dorsi is going to come from the back side of the body, from this lower part of the spine, the pelvis, catching onto some of the ribs and the bottom of the scapula to come around to insert on the front of the humerus. And the main place we can palpate and really experience the tissues of the latissimus dorsi are in this kind of back part of the armpit here, and this tissue that we can grab. Now, the pec major, remember, is going to cover this medial portion of the clavicle and all the way down the sternum here to make this massive muscle of the pecs that covers a majority of the chest and creates this front part of the armpit. So we've got the lats here and the pecs here, and the pecs covering the whole chest. So in order to get an experience of this tissue here, we're going to use a block, and we're going to place it on its middle height. If the block is too intense, feel free to drape a blanket over top. And we're going to lie down on our side with the elbow on the floor and the block centered kind of right in the armpit itself. And what I'm going to do is put my head in my hand here and make sure that your elbow's on the floor. So just make sure you're in a place where you can rest your elbow on the floor, rest your head in your hand, and then rest your hips and legs on the floor however is comfortable. So from here, you can use the hand on the floor in front of you to support you as you just start to rock back and forth. Just rocking gently, and if this is too much, feel free to just back off and just stay still there. But notice as you rock back, there's going to be that kind of ridge of muscle that you rock over, that back part of the armpit of the latissimus. And as I continue to go back, as I'm resting on the back of the scapula there, I'll be on the back of the rotator cuff. Remember, infraspinatus and teres minor. So if I roll all the way back there, I'll feel the back of the scapula. And as I roll forward here, I'm on this back part of the armpit or the lats. So I can kind of rock forward and back and feel that. Now, if I continue to go forward here, I can start to roll onto the pecs here. So I'm rolling toward the ground, and I'll use my hand on the floor to support me. And you can see how the block is now coming into this front part of the armpit here as I roll forward. So I can catch that pec major here. And again, I can kind of roll back and forward, feeling that tension, that band of tissue coming across from the chest to the arm to insert on the front of the humerus. Now pause there on the pecs, close your eyes, and just support yourself however you like with the other hand on the floor in front of you. And take a moment to close your eyes and visualize this massive muscle of the pec major covering this medial part of the clavicle and the sternum, covering a majority of the chest, to insert on the front of the humerus, right behind or lateral to the bicipital groove. And take a moment there just to feel the texture of the tissues, this front part of the armpit, that bulky layer of the pec major. And then to rock back to the back side of the armpit here and feel the tissue of latissimus dorsi. And to close your eyes again and visualize the tissue coming all the way from this broad origin through the back, running from about T7 or the mid-thoracic spine, all the way down to the sacrum, catching the pelvis, the bottom ribs, the bottom of the scapula, this really broad origin, creating this big sheet of muscle coming from the back side through the armpit to the front of the humerus, medial to the bicipital groove. I'm just taking another moment just to rock a little bit forward and back and feel the tissue, and to remember that in between there, if I pause in between the back and the front, between the lats and the pecs, I'm potentially, depending on exactly where that block is, if I'm lower on the rib cage here, I'm also on the serratus in between. Great, now release your block and lie on your back for a moment. And take a moment just to feel the difference between the two sides. This tissue becomes really important for the shoulders, the chest, the posture. So without having to overly analyze it or dissect it, Just notice the experience, which becomes a little bit more clear when we've done one side and not the other, so you can just compare right and left. Notice the effect that releasing the lats and the pecs has on the shoulder, the chest, maybe even the neck or the back. And then roll over to your side and press up, and we'll do the second side. So again, grab your block, place it right in the armpit with your elbow on the floor and your hip on the ground. Then make sure the elbow's on the floor here so you can just rest your head on top of your hand. And then the same thing, you can use the front arm on the ground to support you, finding a comfortable position for the legs, and then rocking a little bit back and forth over the back part of the armpit. So over the lats first. Remember, if this is too intense, all you've got to do is drape a blanket over the block to soften it a little bit more there, maybe even a couple layers. And notice that you can roll back. Make sure you don't roll off of your block, but notice that you can roll back and start to feel a little bit of pressure into the back part of the rotator cuff, the infraspinatus and the teres minor. As we roll forward onto that back part of the armpit, remember we're on lats and teres major. As I continue to roll, as I'm on the ribs, depending on where your block is, if you can feel the ribs underneath you, if I'm situated between the lats and the pecs, I'll feel serratus anterior. And as I come further forward, feel the front part of the armpit there, I'm going to be on pec major. So I can start to locate and differentiate the different tissues. And then roll all the way forward here and support yourself with the other arm on the ground in front of you so that you can drop into the pecs. Close your eyes. And again, just visualize the outline of the pecs going from the medial part of the clavicle all the way down the sternum, creating this massive, powerful muscle that covers a majority of the chest. Coming across to insert on the humerus, just lateral to the bicipital groove. Noticing the quality and the texture of the tissues. Maybe even any differences side to side. And then rolling back onto the lats again. And again, visualizing that outline of the lats, this massive sheet of muscle on the back side. From the mid-thoracic spine down to the pelvis. Coming in to the front of the shoulder to insert medial to the bicipital groove. Take a moment there again just to notice the texture of the tissues there. Rolling back again, we've got infraspinatus, rolling over the lats, the serratus anterior and the ribs, and the pecs. And just rocking forward and back one or two more times there. Feeling that tissue, and then remove your block and lie on your back. And again, just pause. Find this is often an area that's overlooked for the neck as well. When we look at the body together, it's so important that each of these areas is functioning efficiently, not just for that joint itself, but also for the surrounding tissues. Just take a moment to notice the effect on the neck and the back and anything else that you might not have expected that maybe seems unrelated to the shoulder. Right, and then come back up and just let's point out really quickly on the arm so that you can see how all of this comes together. Remember, we've got pecs and lats. And remember, we've got this bicipital groove here where the long head of the biceps is going to come up. Then medial to the bicipital groove, remember, we've got the lats and the teres major inserting. the pecs coming over lateral to the bicipital groove. Overlying all of this, we've got the deltoid. Some of the muscle tissue of the deltoid overlying all of this here. And then we also have that tendinous cuff of the rotator cuff underneath the deltoid. So we've got the rotator cuff up high, the bicipital groove and the bicep tendon going through, the pecs, the lats, the deltoid overlying it all. So this next one we're just going to palpate with our hands. Remember, we've got the common connection of the traps and the deltoid here with this V of bone going from the spine of the scapula through the acromion and around to the lateral portion of the clavicle here. So the traps, remember, are going to go all the way from the occiput all the way down through all of the spinous processes of the cervical spine and all of the spinous processes of the thoracic spine. So C1 to T12. And remember, it's going to come together to kind of fold over here. And you can palpate this again and feel this thickening of the traps. As you take your hand and grab hold of the traps, you can feel the tissues kind of fold over on themselves here. You can kind of hook your thumb underneath there and feel how the tissues literally fold over and become much stronger, much more dense up in the upper traps, which won't change significantly. However, what we're looking for is to soften some of the excess tension that develops there. Then from there, the deltoid is going to continue down. Remember, from this V of bone all the way down to the deltoid tuberosity. So you can palpate the front of the deltoid as you bring your arm forward and feel the deltoid contract. Take your arm out to the side and feel the lateral portion. Take the arm behind you and feel the posterior delt contract. And you can feel that the muscle of the deltoid really covering the whole shoulder here. Then the next part that's really familiar to us, we know really well, is the biceps and the triceps. Remember, the important point here, we've got the long head of the biceps through the bicipital groove, coming to the supraglenoid tubercle and attaching to the labrum. The short head to the coracoid process, and then the long head of the triceps going to the infraglenoid tubercle, right below the glenoid fossa, and becoming somewhat entangled with the lats nearby. And you can really feel this as you palpate. If you grab a hold of the triceps here and start to walk up, you can feel how it becomes a little bit more tendinous, a little bit higher, much closer to the shoulder here. And you might be able to even follow it in towards the shoulder there and feel how it gets really entwined with the latissimus here as you just lift your arm up overhead. So remember, we've got the lats here, the triceps here, and you can feel where they kind of converge through the back of the armpit, really almost right where that crease is in the fold of the armpit when you put your arm down. You can just feel that if you place a little bit of pressure there right in the crease of the armpit and lift your arm up overhead, you can start to feel how those tissues become a little bit intertwined there as they pass across each other, passing over each other in opposite directions. So the last part here, really briefly, we're going to talk about is the flexors and the extensors. And the easiest way to experience this is just to take your fingers like so, in like a C shape here, and grab a hold of one side, this coarser skin side with the forefingers, and the thumb into the belly of the thin skin side. And all you're going to do is just wiggle the fingers. So if I take them into extension, I'll feel the extensors start to fire here, and I can even wiggle my fingers there and feel different little muscle bellies there, moving different fingers. And as I curl my fingers the other way, here, I'll just turn it over so you can see, and curl the fingers, I'll also feel the tendons contracting. A little easier to feel on the extensor side, but I can also, as I just wiggle the fingers around, imagine like you're playing the piano or typing on a keyboard here, you can feel how they work together to move the fingers back and forth. Now, we also mentioned there's a lot of really fine motor movement that happens in the hands here, so a lot of other muscles, but for our purposes, extensors and flexors. Great, so that concludes all of the anatomy and all of the palpation.